In the far edge of the Orion sector, the alien colony lay in silence, hidden under a sky filled with stars that looked cold and distant. Their world had once been a place of trade and peace, but now it was a forgotten outpost, ignored by the mighty Galactic Council, abandoned when the rival species began their endless raids. The enemy ships came without mercy, stealing supplies, destroying defenses, and leaving fear in the hearts of every family. The colony's shields had cracked. Long ago, their weapons were old, their soldiers tired and their hope fading. Night after night they sent distress signals, but no one answered. It felt like the entire galaxy had already decided they were lost. That night the colony braced for another attack. Mothers hid their children. Elders whispered prayers in dark halls. The sky above them was quiet for the moment, but everyone knew silence never lasted long. Ships could appear at any time, bringing fire and ruin. In a small home at the colony's edge, a child pressed his face against the window, waiting, his eyes wide, his heart racing. He wondered if they would survive till morning. Far away in the void, a single human shuttle drifted on a scouting mission. Inside the small craft, Captain Ethan Cole sat with his crew, tired from days of traveling through empty space. The shuttle was not built for battle, only for exploration and search. But fate had other plans. A faint signal reached their console, broken and weak like a voice crying out from underwater. It was a distress call. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he listened. He heard words in an alien language, but pain and fear needed no translation. Someone was begging for help. The crew argued for a moment. It was not their mission. They were far from Earth's borders. The Galactic Council had declared the Orion sector unstable and dangerous, but Ethan remembered the oath he took, to protect lives where he could. He was not the kind of man who ignored a call for help. With steady hands, he turned the shuttle toward the signal. His crew followed his orders even as fear crept into their voices. The colony came into view, a broken world lit by faint fires, its surface scarred by raids, its sky heavy with smoke. The sensors picked up movement, enemy raiders circling above, hunting for more victims. Ethan's shuttle was too small to fight them, too weak to make a difference in war, but his heart told him one life was worth the risk. When the shuttle slipped through the smoke, the colony's people looked up in shock. They had expected only death to arrive, but instead they saw a new shape, one they did not recognize. Human ships were still a mystery to most of the galaxy. The shuttle landed near the edge of the colony where the fighting was harshest. Ethan and his small team rushed out, blasters in hand. They fought through the burning streets, searching, listening, until Ethan heard a cry, high and desperate. In the rubble of a collapsed building, a child was trapped. Her alien skin glowed faintly in the firelight, her eyes wide with terror as enemy soldiers closed in. Ethan moved without hesitation. His weapon roared, sending the enemy scattering. Smoke and sparks filled the air, but he reached her, his hands lifting her from the rubble with surprising gentleness. The child clung to him, her small arms tight around his neck. The colony's people watched in disbelief. Never before had anyone from outside risked their life for one of their children, not when the council had abandoned them, not when others had left them to die. But this human, a stranger, had done it without a second thought. Ethan carried the child back to his shuttle, shielding her with his own body. Shots fired, explosions shook the ground, but he never let go. When the hatch closed behind him and the engines roared, the colony cheered for the first time in years. The sound weak at first, then stronger. They had seen something they thought impossible. The shuttle rose into the sky, disappearing into the stars, the child safe in Ethan's arms, the enemy furious but too late to stop him. The story of that night spread like fire through the colony. They whispered his name in the dark, Ethan Cole, the human who came when no one else would, the human who proved that compassion was stronger than fear. It was only one act, only one life saved. But for the colony, it was everything. Hope was reborn and deep inside. Ethan knew this was not the end. Something had begun that night. Something larger than he could see. The galaxy had ignored the cries of a dying people, but humanity would not. This was the spark, the beginning of a bond, forged in fire and courage, a bond that would one day bring fleets across the stars, not to conquer but to rescue, and it all started with one human who refused to look away. Word of the Humans' Act spread quickly across the alien colony, though no ships had come to help them in years, though no one had answered their calls. Now they whispered about a man named Ethan Cole, the human captain who had saved a single child. It seemed small to the rest of the galaxy, but to the people of the colony, it was like light breaking through endless night. The story passed from family to family, from elders to children, until his name carried weight. Not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as a savior. The rescued child, a little girl with bright eyes, spoke of the moment again and again. She told others how the human carried her out of the fire, how he shielded her from enemy shots, how he never let her go. Her words spread faster than the flames of the battle had. For the first time in years, the people did not talk only about death or defeat. They talked about hope. They talked about humanity. Among the colony was a young leader named Tavara. She was strong and proud. Her voice often kept her people steady when raids grew too harsh. She had been ready to see her world fall into dust. Yet when she heard the child's words, she felt something stir inside her chest. She remembered the look in the child's eyes when she spoke about the human. It was not fear. It was trust. And that trust began to touch others. The colony gathered at night to speak in hushed voices. They spoke of how one human had done more than the entire Galactic Council, how his small ship had achieved what the mighty fleets refused to attempt. Some wondered if more humans were like him. If Earth had others who cared, others who might come. Though the thought seemed too good to be true, it planted a seed of faith in hearts that had long been empty. Tavara stood before her people one evening. The fires from the ruined buildings glowing behind her, she raised her voice clear and strong. She told them they were not forgotten. She told them one human had proved it, and she swore that if there was even one who cared, there could be more. She urged them to hold on, not to surrender their lives to despair. Many wept as they listened, not because they were weak, but because they had almost forgotten how it felt to believe in something again. Meanwhile, Ethan's shuttle returned to human space, the rescued child asleep in his arms, his crew tired but alive. His report to Earth's Fleet Command was long and detailed. He wrote of the raids, of the suffering, of the abandonment by the Council. But most of all, he wrote of the colony's bravery. He wrote of their endurance, of their will to survive, despite everything. And he begged that Earth not ignore them as the others had. Back on the colony, the enemy had not stopped. They raided again. But this time the people resisted harder, inspired by the thought that someone out there might come back for them. Fathers and mothers fought with renewed strength. Children hid but did not cry as loudly, because they had hope even if it was fragile. The name Ethan Cole became almost sacred, whispered like a promise, whispered like a prayer, and the young leader Tavara carried it on her lips. She told her people, "Remember him. Remember that. He did not pass us by." She did not know if she would ever meet him, but she carried his memory as if it was a flame, far away. Ethan's report reached the commanders of Earth's fleets. Many scoffed at first. The Orion sector was dangerous. Humanity was still young compared to the great powers of the galaxy. But others read his words and could not ignore them. They remembered Earth's history, the times when their ancestors stood against impossible odds, and they saw in Ethan's actions the same spirit. Humanity had never turned its back on those who needed help, and they would not start now. The whispers on the colony became songs of defiance. Children played pretending to be human soldiers, holding sticks like rifles, shouting Ethan's name as if it could drive away fear. The enemy began to notice the change. They saw a people who no longer looked broken, a people who fought harder, who held on tighter, and they grew uneasy, for they did not understand the power of hope. Tavara looked to the stars each night, wondering if she would see human ships return, wondering if Ethan's kind would come for them. Though the sky remained empty, she did not let despair return. She had seen the truth in one act, and she knew truth had power. The Galactic Council still dismissed the colony as a lost cause. They shook their heads and turned their eyes away. But in the quiet halls of Earth's fleet, Ethan's report was read and reread. Commanders began to plan, to wonder, to prepare. If one human could save a child, then perhaps an entire fleet could save a world. The wheels of destiny began to turn, and the colony did not know it yet, but their whispered prayers had already reached the ears of humanity, and humanity was listening. The rival species was not blind to what had happened. They had seen how one human shuttle had landed and taken a child away. They had seen how the colony's spirit had begun to rise instead of fall. This troubled them, for they wanted the colony to die quietly, broken and forgotten. They wanted no one to notice, no one to resist. But now things had changed, so they began to gather their full force. In the dark corners of space, fleets of enemy warships moved into formation, their hulls sharp and gleaming like black knives, hundreds of them, each one larger than the small ships the colony had fought before. They wanted to crush the colony once and for all. No more raids, no more slow destruction. This time they planned to wipe it off the star charts forever. Their leaders spoke with cold voices, promising swift fire and total silence. On the colony itself, fear returned when scouts reported the enemy was gathering. Mothers looked at their children and wondered if even hope could survive against so much power. The story of Ethan Cole gave them strength, but stories could not stop plasma. Cannons, they needed more than whispers now. They needed ships, shields, and soldiers, but none came. Or so they thought. Light years away on Earth, Ethan's report sat on the desks of fleet commanders. Some officers dismissed it, calling it a distraction from humanity's own borders, but others felt the weight of his words. They remembered the times when humans themselves had been ignored by greater powers, and they saw a reflection of that pain in the colony's struggle. More than once, history had shown that humanity was at its strongest when standing against injustice. Meetings were held in long halls aboard orbital stations. Admirals debated, politicians argued, and yet through all the noise, Ethan's voice in his report, cut clear, he had written with passion, describing the fire, the smoke, the screams, and how one small act had brought back hope. His words burned through the doubts of many, and slowly, decisions began to form. Humanity was underestimated in the galaxy, still seen as newcomers, still thought of as too reckless, too young, but that worked in their favor. No one expected much of them. No one believed Earth would act. But the commanders decided otherwise. They saw in this moment a chance to show who they were, to show what humanity stood for. Across the Terran fleet, orders were given in secret. Warships that had been silent for years were awakened. Dreadnoughts left their orbits. Destroyers and carriers began to move. Engineers worked through the nights. Crews trained without pause, and yet no announcement was made. The galaxy did not know, even the enemy did not know, for humanity had decided to strike not with words, but with action. Back on the colony, the alien leader Tavara stood on the walls of the settlement. Her eyes watching the skies, she knew the storm was coming. Scouts had confirmed that enemy fleets were massing, but still she told her people to hold on. She told them that the humans' promise was not broken, that somewhere out there, someone was preparing to return. Her people believed her, though their hearts trembled. The enemy's fleets gathered like a wave about to crash, their numbers too great for the colony's tiny defenses. The people prepared for the worst, yet they did not bow. They dug trenches. They built what shields they could. They prepared to face death with dignity. And in the silence of night, children whispered Ethan's name as if it could protect them. On Earth, Ethan himself stood before the high command, his eyes steady, his voice calm. He repeated what he had written. He begged them to act quickly before the enemy struck. He said the colony was not just another world. It was proof that humanity could be different from the Council, that they could care when no one else would. And his words carried weight, not because he was powerful, but because he believed them with all his heart. The admirals nodded. The decision was sealed. Fleets would move, quietly, carefully, and, when the time came, they would arrive not as wanderers but as saviors. Ethan was given command of one of the ships, not because he was the highest ranked, but because he was the one who had started it all, the one who had shown what a single act of courage could do. The storm was close now, the enemy fleets ready to fall on the colony like predators on a wounded prey. But in the shadows of deep space, another force was preparing. Humanity's warships. Their railguns loaded, their shields charged, their engines burning bright, waiting for the signal, waiting for the moment to show the galaxy that Earth had not forgotten. The gathering storm built on both sides, one side filled with hate and the desire to erase, the other filled with determination and the promise to protect. The colony did not yet know that they were not alone, that in the darkness beyond their skies, ships with human flags were already on their way, and when they arrived, the galaxy itself would tremble, because one human had saved a child, and now humanity was coming to rescue them all. The day came when the skies over the alien colony darkened with shadows that did not belong to clouds. Enemy warships appeared in orbit, huge vessels with hulls glowing red from their engines, their weapons bristling, their formation tight. The people of the colony looked up and felt their hope tremble, for they knew this was not a raid like before. This was the end. The rival species had come to wipe them out completely. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers held weapons that looked too small against such power, and Tavara stood on the walls, her eyes fierce though her heart shook inside. The enemy descended slowly, almost with arrogance. They knew the colony had no chance. Their commanders laughed on their bridges, promising each other that by nightfall there would be no survivors left on this world. Plasma cannons charged, hangars opened, ready to release swarms of fighters. The alien civilians huddled together. Some prayed, others only cried in silence, waiting for the fire to fall. Then something unexpected happened. Far away from the enemy's flank, strange signals appeared on the colony's sensors. At first the defenders thought it was more enemy ships, more reinforcements to crush them. Fear rippled through the colony. But then the readings grew clearer, the shapes of the ships sharper, and whispers began to spread. These were not enemy vessels, their signatures were different. Smaller at first, but growing, then larger and stronger. One by one, human warships dropped out of hyperspace, their hulls shining silver and gray, their engines bright blue as they flared into real space. First came cruisers, then destroyers, then massive carriers. Finally, the dreadnoughts that looked like mountains of steel floating in the void. The largest among them carried a simple name on its side, UES Horizon, and on its command chair sat Captain Ethan Cole, the man who once saved a single child, now returning with the strength of Earth behind him. The enemy fleets faltered for a moment, confusion spreading through their ranks. They had not expected interference, much less from humans. The humans were still considered young and untested by the rest of the galaxy, yet here they were, dozens upon dozens of warships forming an iron wall between the colony and certain death. Their railguns armed, their missile bays opening, their fighters launching in streams of fire. On the ground, the colony erupted in cries of shock and relief. Children pointed at the sky, their voices breaking with excitement. Adults stood frozen, tears running down their faces for the first time. They saw ships coming not to destroy but to defend. Their hope, which had been so fragile, now burst into flames. Tavara raised her voice, shouting for all to hear. They came back. Humanity came back. And the crowd roared with her. Ethan sat on his bridge, his face calm though his heart beat like thunder. He remembered the night he carried the child from the fire. He remembered the fear in her eyes, and he promised himself that no more children of this colony would face such terror alone. His voice echoed through the comms of the fleet, giving orders with steady precision. Form defensive line around the colony, hold position, protect the civilians at all costs. His crew obeyed without hesitation, their own spirits rising, for they knew they were not just fighting a battle, they were making history. The enemy did not wait long. Anger burned away their shock. Their commanders ordered the attack. Plasma fire lit up the void, streaks of red and green energy flashing through the darkness. The first blasts hammered against human shields, rocking their ships, but they held. Railguns answered, massive shells cutting through space, tearing holes into enemy cruisers. The battle had begun. From the colony, the people watched the night sky transform into a storm of light and fire. Enemy ships burning, human ships holding strong. The ground shook with distant thunder as explosions echoed above. Every strike, every blast was a reminder that they were not alone, that humanity had chosen to stand with them. The horizon led the fleet like a shield, its broadside unleashing volleys of fire, Smaller destroyers darted around it, intercepting enemy fighters. Carriers deployed swarms of human interceptors that met enemy craft head-on. The stars themselves seemed to tremble under the clash, and yet the human line did not break. Ethan's voice remained steady. Even as alarms blared and damage reports filled his screens, he refused to let fear show. His crew took courage from his calm. They fought harder, faster, sharper, their unity unmatched. The colony's defenders could not believe what they were seeing. Humans fighting with such discipline, such fire, for a world that was not even their own. Down below, Tavara clenched her fists, her chest rising with pride. She whispered to herself, "They did not forget us." She knew now that her people's survival was not a miracle, but a choice. A choice made by humanity. And that choice changed everything. As the first wave of the enemy crashed against the human fleet and failed to break it, the colony's people understood something important. Humanity had come not because they were ordered by the council, not because they sought wealth or power, but because loyalty and compassion guided them. One man's act of courage had brought an entire fleet, and now the skies burned with proof. The end had come for the enemy's arrogance, and the beginning had come for a bond that would never be broken. The first clash came with a roar that shook the skies. The enemy opened fire with all their fury. Their plasma cannons burned through the dark, green and red energy bolts streaking toward the human fleet like falling stars. The colony below lit up as if the heavens themselves were on fire. The people held their breath, some covering their children's eyes, others whispering silent prayers. But the human fleet did not break. Shields flared blue as the first blasts struck. The massive warships absorbed the energy, rocking but holding steady. Then came the reply. Railguns thundered, their shells traveling at impossible speeds, slamming into enemy hulls with devastating force. Explosions tore through the void. Enemy cruisers cracked apart like glass hit with a hammer. The humans had answered, and their answer was fire. Ethan sat on the bridge of the horizon, his eyes fixed on the chaos outside, his voice steady as he called out orders. "Keep formation. Focus fire on their forward line. Do not let them break through." Around him, his crew worked like a single body. No hesitation, no fear. They had trained for this moment, and now they fought not just for Earth but for the colony below. The enemy threw everything they had into the fight. Squadrons of fighters poured out of their carriers, wings of black metal slicing through space. They rushed at the humans, hoping to overwhelm them with numbers. But the humans were ready. From the carriers of the fleet, hundreds of interceptors launched, sleek ships darting into the fight like arrows. Dogfights erupted, streaks of light weaving across the stars, missiles locking on, explosions bursting in fiery blossoms. On the ground, the alien civilians could see it all. They had never witnessed such a sight. The night sky alive with streaks of fire. Massive explosions flashing like suns being born and dying again. Children clung to their parents, yet their fear was mixed with awe. This was not the silence of defeat. This was the thunder of protection. The first wave of the enemy pressed hard, their heavy ships advancing slowly but relentlessly. Their commanders believed numbers would crush the humans, but Ethan's fleet fought like a shield. Every time the enemy pressed forward, the humans shifted, blocking them. Every hole was covered, every weak point defended. The horizon itself became a wall, its cannons unleashing steady fire, cutting down ships that dared approach too close. Losses came. Human ships shuddered under enemy fire. One destroyer took a heavy hit, its hull breached, flames spilling into space. The crew fought to the end, buying time for others to regroup. Another cruiser fell silent, torn apart by plasma bolts. The names of the lost were spoken over comms, but the line did not break. Each loss only hardened the resolve of the survivors. The colony's people watched as enemy wreckage began to fall from the sky, burning like meteors, crashing into the distant mountains. Every wreck was a cheer in their hearts, proof that the humans were holding, proof that the enemy could bleed. Tavara stood tall on the walls, her voice rising above the fear. "Do you see? They fight for us. Humanity fights for us." Her people raised their voices too, a roar of hope that rolled through the streets. Back in space, the fight grew even fiercer. Enemy capital ships tried to flank the humans, hoping to break their formation. But Ethan saw it coming. "Left wing, intercept, cut them off." His voice rang, and the humans moved as if they had rehearsed it 1,000 times. The flanking ships were met head-on, a storm of missiles and gunfire tearing them apart before they could reach the colony. The battle seemed endless, the void filled with smoke, fire, and the drifting remains of ships. But through it all the humans stood their ground, protecting the colony as if it was Earth itself. Ethan never left his chair. His eyes never wavered, though exhaustion pulled at him. His voice gave strength. To his crew, his calm became their courage. In one moment, an enemy battleship locked its weapons on the colony itself, preparing to rain death down on the civilians. But before it could fire, 3 human cruisers broke formation, rushing forward in a desperate move. They fired everything they had: railguns, missiles, beams, their weapons glowing red from the heat. The battleship exploded in a blast so bright, it blinded sensors. The cruisers themselves were torn apart in the blast, but the colony was safe. The people below saw the sacrifice. Their voices broke with cries and sobs. They had not thought anyone would give their lives for them, not when the council had abandoned them. Yet here were humans, strangers, dying to keep them alive, and that changed everything. As the battle dragged on, the first clash proved something to everyone watching. The enemy had power, yes, but humanity had something stronger. They had loyalty, discipline, and the will to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Every shot fired from the horizon, and her fleet was not just a weapon, it was a promise. A promise that the colony would not fall. By the time the first clash ended, wreckage floated through orbit, both human and enemy. The skies glowed with fire and smoke. But the line had held. The colony still stood, and the humans were still there, scarred but unbroken. The people below lifted their eyes to the stars, not in fear, but in awe. They had seen humanity's answer to the enemy's fury, and it was steel, sacrifice, and unshakable courage. The war was far from over, but hope had survived the fire, and hope was the strongest weapon of all. The battle had raged for hours, the enemy still pushing forward with everything they had, but the humans refused to fall back. Their ships fought like walls of iron, their weapons firing in steady rhythm. The colony below trembled under the thunder of war, and though the defenders cheered for every enemy ship that burned, they also feared how long the humans could hold, for the enemy seemed endless. Wave after wave of fighters and cruisers kept coming. Ethan Cole knew this. He sat in the command chair of the horizon, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the armrests. His eyes, moving across the battlefield map, he could see the losses, the ships that were gone, the names of the crews flashing red on his screens. Each one was a weight in his chest, but he also knew there was still one card he had not played. One hope hidden in the darkness of deep space. Waiting for his signal, he gave the order calmly. "Deploy the Resolute." The bridge crew looked at him with wide eyes, for they knew what it meant. A hush fell over the humans listening on comms, and then from the far side of the battle, a massive shadow emerged. A ship unlike the others, larger, heavier, its armor layered like a fortress, its cannons glowing faintly as they powered up. This was the dreadnought Resolute, hidden until now. Its arrival like a mountain rising from the void. The enemy fleets faltered when they saw it, their sensors flashing warnings, their commanders shouting orders. They had not expected such a weapon from humanity, for they believed humans were too young a race to field ships of such size and power. But there it was, the Resolute, moving slowly and steadily into firing position. Its presence alone enough to shake the enemy's confidence. Ethan's voice rang through the fleet. "All ships hold the line. The Resolute will strike." And they obeyed, buying the dreadnought the time it needed. Enemy battleships turned desperately, plasma cannons firing in bright arcs, but the Resolute's shields flared and held, absorbing the fury like a mountain, standing against storm winds. And then its main guns roared. The first shot was like thunder in the void, a beam of pure energy that tore through space and slammed into the enemy flagship, the ship that had commanded the assault. Its hull cracked, fire burst from its sides, and then in one shattering blast it exploded, the shockwave tearing through nearby ships, leaving wreckage spinning in the void. The entire battlefield froze. For a heartbeat, the colony below erupted in cheers, voices rising as if the world itself had been reborn. Tavara stood on the walls of the colony, her chest heaving, her eyes wet with tears she did not hide. She raised her voice so her people could hear. "Do you see? They came back for us. Humanity fights for us." Her words rolled across the crowd and they shouted with her, voices echoing through the burning streets. The despair that had haunted them for years was gone, replaced by something fierce, something unbreakable. The humans did not fight alone, for the colony had a few surviving strike craft hidden in hangars, old and damaged, but still able to fly, inspired by the sight of the Resolute destroying the flagship. Pilots rushed to their ships. They launched into the sky, joining the battle, their small fighters darting among the humans, covering their flanks, taking risks no one expected. Humanity and the colony fighting side by side, their trust sealed in fire. On the horizon, Ethan watched as alien ships fought alongside his lips curved into a small smile. This was what he had hoped for, not just rescue, but unity. He knew that if they survived this night, the galaxy would never see them the same way again. The enemy was shaken but not broken. Their commanders screamed for vengeance, ordering all ships to target the dreadnought. Plasma fire rained down on the Resolute. Its shields flickered, its armor groaned, but the great ship endured, firing back with unstoppable power, tearing holes into the enemy line. The battlefield became a graveyard of wreckage, ships burning, drifting, colliding. Yet the humans pressed forward, each volley carving a path toward victory. The colony's people watched the night sky burn. Children pointed with wide eyes, their fear forgotten. For they saw the humans and their own kind fighting together, for once not divided by race or species but united by survival. Every explosion above was not just death. It was proof that they were no longer alone. On the ground, Tavara clenched her fists as she watched the battle turn, her voice hoarse from shouting, but she did not stop. She called to her people again and again, reminding them that they had allies, reminding them that they mattered, no longer forgotten, no longer abandoned. She knew this moment would live forever in their history, the night humanity chose to stand with them. The tide of battle had shifted. The enemy was no longer the unstoppable force they had once seemed. Their lines broken, their morale shattered. The humans pressed their advantage, the dreadnought Resolute leading the way. Ethan's voice calm, his orders precise, his fleet fighting with unity and purpose. This was not conquest. This was rescue, and every human knew it. As dawn broke over the colony, the night sky still burned with wreckage, but the people no longer trembled. They raised their eyes with pride, for they had seen humanity's true strength, not just in weapons, but in loyalty, sacrifice, and courage. The enemy had tried to erase them, but instead, they had given them a story that would echo across the galaxy. The story of how one human once saved a child, and how humanity returned with a dreadnought to save them all. The sky above the alien colony was filled with fire. Broken ships drifted like burning skeletons, and the thunder of battle shook the very ground. Yet despite the chaos, the humans and the colony's defenders were no longer fighting just to survive. They were pushing back, their courage stronger than their fear. The dreadnought Resolute fired again and again, each blast tearing through the enemy fleets. The humans pressed the advantage with precision. Destroyers moved in tight groups, cruisers unleashed volleys of railgun fire, and carriers sent wave after wave of fighters into the void. Enemy lines cracked, their formations broke apart. What had begun as a sure victory for them was now collapsing into panic and retreat. Ethan Cole stood tall on the bridge of the horizon, his face illuminated by the glow of burning wrecks outside. His voice was steady but fierce. "Don't let them regroup. Press them back. Drive them away from the colony." His crew answered him with sharp voices, their hands flying over consoles. Every person aboard knowing this was their moment, not just to win a battle, but to prove who humanity was. The enemy commanders screamed orders in desperation, trying to hold their fleets together, but morale was shattered. They had never faced humans like this. Soldiers who fought not for power, not for territory, but for others. The enemy soldiers could not understand it. They had fought many races before, and most had broken when pushed. But the humans only fought harder. each loss fueling their determination. On the ground, the colony's people watched in awe, their voices rising in cheers with every enemy ship that exploded in the sky. Children pointed at the streams of human fighters, shouting their names. The humans are winning. Mothers held their children close, whispering that they would live to see tomorrow. Fathers clenched their fists, tears in their eyes, because they had not believed survival was possible until now. Tavara, standing on the walls, felt her throat ache from shouting encouragement, but she did not stop. She called out to her people, "Do not be silent. Let them hear you. Let the galaxy know we are not broken." Her words carried across the streets, and the colony roared with her, the sound of hope louder than the thunder of war above. The humans fought with a ferocity that inspired everyone. Small frigates darted into gaps in the enemy line, sacrificing themselves to keep the larger ships safe. Every death was honored instantly. Names called out over comms as the fleet pressed forward. Fighters broke through enemy swarms, missiles streaking into the darkness, blasting apart cruisers that had seemed unstoppable. At one point, an enemy battleship tried to retreat toward the edge of the system, but the humans did not allow it. The horizon itself turned its massive guns, unleashing a barrage that split the ship into two burning halves. The wreck drifted in silence, glowing red like a dying star. The colony cheered, their hope blazing brighter. Ethan's voice filled the human fleet. "We fight for every life below us. Remember that. No retreat, no surrender. We stand until they are safe." His words gave strength even to the most exhausted soldiers, their arms sore, their eyes burning, but their hearts unshaken, for they were not just fighting a war, they were protecting a promise. The enemy's retreat grew desperate, their ships scattering, trying to escape the wrath of the Terran fleet. But Ethan gave the order to pursue, not out of cruelty, but to make sure the enemy could never return. Human warships surged forward, hunting down stragglers, blasting them apart before they could regroup in another corner of space. The colony watched the sky clear little by little, the red lights of enemy engines vanishing, replaced by the steady glow of human ships holding position like guardians. The battle was not without cost. The wreckage of human ships also drifted above, silent tombs for the brave souls who had given everything. When the names of the lost were read, even the colony's people wept. Though they had not known those humans, they felt the sacrifice as if it was their own. They understood that those humans had died for them, for their children, and that knowledge carved respect so deep it would never fade. Children ran through the streets below, laughing through tears, shouting Ethan's name, shouting humanity's name, their joy aflame. No enemy could ever extinguish. Tavara looked to the heavens, her chest tight, her eyes burning. She whispered to herself, "We were not alone. We were never alone." And she knew her people would carry this night in their hearts forever. The sky was still full of wreckage and fire, but the war was ending. The humans had achieved what no one else dared attempt. They had stood between the colony and destruction, and they had won. The humans did not lower their guns out of arrogance, but out of duty. They had fought with honor, with sacrifice, with loyalty, and in doing so, they had written a new chapter in the galaxy's story. When the last enemy ship fled, limping away into the void, silence finally fell. The humans held formation, their shields flickering, their hulls scarred, but their spirits unbroken. Victory was theirs. The colony was alive, and hope was stronger than fear. The people below fell to their knees, not in surrender, but in gratitude. The warships above were not just machines of war, they were symbols of salvation. In that moment, the galaxy itself shifted. For all who heard the story would know the truth. Humanity was no longer a young race to be ignored, no longer an unknown people in the shadows. They were the species that came when no one else would, the species that fought for those left behind, and the species that turned despair into victory with fire and steel. The night had been filled with death and sacrifice, but it ended with survival and unity. Humanity and the colony now forever bound by the blood spilled, the promises kept, and the victory won together. The enemy had tried to erase them, but instead they had created a legend. The legend of the night humanity returned and drove the darkness away. When the last enemy ship was gone, silence fell across the stars. The colony that had once prepared to die now stood in awe beneath a sky glowing with the wreckage of battle. Pieces of enemy vessels burned like falling stars, drifting slowly. Into the void, the people looked up. Their eyes filled not with fear but with wonder. They had survived not because of the Council, not because of their own failing defenses, but because humanity had come back for them. The humans did not leave right away. Their fleet remained in orbit, shields lowered but weapons still ready, like guardians watching over those they had saved. The horizon, scarred but still standing proud, led the formation, and on its bridge, Ethan Cole allowed himself to breathe for the first time in hours. He had fought many battles, but none had felt like this. This was not just victory, this was proof. Proof that one act of kindness could grow into something greater. Down on the colony, the people gathered in the central square, their homes still smoking, their streets cracked, but their spirits alive. Tavara stood at the front, her people waiting in silence. And then the humans came. Shuttles descended from the skies, their engines humming as they landed among the ruins. When Ethan stepped out, the crowd gasped. They had heard his name whispered like a legend. Now they saw him with their own eyes, not as a story, but as a man. Tavara walked forward, her steps slow but steady. She looked at Ethan, the one who had saved a single child months ago and now returned with a fleet to save them all. Her voice trembled with emotion as she lowered her head, not in shame, but in respect. "You came back," she whispered. Her people echoed her words, their voices rising. They came back. Ethan did not raise his hands for applause. He did not speak of victory. Instead, he said simply, "We don't leave friends behind." His words were simple, but they carried weight heavier than steel. In that moment, the colony knew humanity's heart. They were not here for conquest. They were not here for glory. They were here because loyalty demanded it. The people of the colony rushed forward, some falling to their knees, some reaching out to touch the hands of the human soldiers. Mothers wept, fathers bowed their heads, children clung to the legs of Marines in armor, thanking them over and over. The bond was no longer whispers or hope. It was real, sealed in blood and fire. In the days that followed, the humans helped rebuild. Their engineers worked beside the colony's builders. Their medics treated the wounded without hesitation. Food was shared, shelters were raised, and, for the first time in years, laughter returned to the streets. Children who once cried in fear now played around the human soldiers, climbing on their arms, tugging at their uniforms, calling them heroes. Ethan and Tavara met again in the square, this time with no smoke above, only the drifting glow of wreckage. She placed her hand on her chest, a gesture of deep respect. Among her people, "You gave us more than survival, you gave us hope," she said, her voice firm. And Ethan only nodded, because he knew it was true. Word spread quickly across the galaxy, carried by traders, by refugees, by those who had watched from afar. They told the story of a forgotten colony saved not by the Great Council, but by humanity. They told of how humans had stood against a superior fleet and won, of how they fought for people who were not even their own. And the story burned like fire through the stars. Other races listened, some with disbelief, some with fear, some with admiration, but all understood one thing. Humanity could no longer be dismissed. They were no longer the newcomers on the galactic stage. They had revealed their true nature. Not conquerors, not tyrants, but protectors. The kind who would return even when others turned away. The kind who would fight to the last breath for allies and friends. For the colony, the night of despair had turned into the dawn of alliance. Treaties were signed, bonds forged. The colony pledged loyalty to Earth, not because of orders or demands, but because of gratitude, because of trust. Their children would grow up remembering that when no one else came, humanity did. On the horizon, Ethan Cole stood once more at the viewing window, the stars stretching endless before him. He thought of the child he had once carried out of fire, how one life had sparked all of this, how her small arms around his neck had changed the course of history. He knew the battles were not over. Enemies would return, but he also knew something stronger had begun, a bond that no war could break. The colony was no longer alone, and humanity was no longer forgotten. Together they had written a new story, one that would echo through the ages. The galaxy would remember this not as the day the colony was destroyed, but as the day humanity returned, not for glory, not for conquest, but because they had made a promise. And humanity always kept its promises that night. As fires died and the stars shone brighter, the people of the colony raised their eyes to the sky. Not with fear, but with pride. They whispered Ethan's name. They whispered humanity's name. And they knew their future was no longer written in despair but in hope, for the humans had saved one child and then they had saved them all, and from that day forward, they would never be forgotten again.